Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us. I don't know whether you're joining us live and we've popped up on your LinkedIn feed, or whether you're catching us on replay on LinkedIn, or in fact on YouTube, where we are posting this as well, hosting this. So I've been hosting these LinkedIn Lives. My name's Sally Spicer, in one guise or another for about 6 years, which is absolutely wild. And I usually come up with the idea of what to share off the back of conversations that I'm having with my clients kind of behind the scenes. And for someone who literally talks for a living, that is actually my job, okay? It's clear that the clients that we're engaging with and the DEI professionals are all facing the same challenges. But what's also really apparent to me is that these conversations are all being had behind closed doors, okay? Behind boardroom doors, in these invite-only rooms. And a fun fact for you, I was actually invited to an event a couple of weeks ago only to get uninvited, lol. And also behind these like massive paywalls, some event companies who are operating under the guise of inclusion experts are charging £500 a ticket for an event, which is mental. And also we were nominated, technically was nominated for award a couple of weeks ago, which is brilliant and really kind of humbling. But then they wanted to charge us £500 each to come to the event, which is just absolutely crazy. So, but all of this stuff made me think, right, we need to get these conversations out there in the open, okay? It is my duty, I see it, to get these conversations out there in the free, in the, ether, and that is why I've come up with this concept of inclusion rewritten. Okay, this is all about redefining inclusion, what it means in today's business landscape, how organizations can make it relevant, nuanced, and commercially meaningful, because that is what it's going to take in order for this work to succeed. So inclusion rewritten really challenges leaders and D&I practitioners to ask, what does inclusion look like for our business, and how do we make it count? And you can see I am not alone. I have got the incredible Rachel Billington, who is an inclusion expert and founder of Change Wave Consultancy, with me today. I'm so excited to have you here today, Rachel. Thank you so much for your time. I also want to say, use the chat function for anyone. Get involved, ask us questions. This is a safe space. There's no such thing as a silly question, but I want you to use it as an opportunity to not only connect with us, but connect with each other. We've got to stick together in this DEI world. So, Rachel, over to you. I've spoken enough already. Tell us about you. And thanks again for being here.
Hi, everybody. Sally, thanks firstly for inviting me. I always love a conversation with you. The fact that we're now letting lots of people watch that conversation is even better, and please do join in. Many of you, hopefully, I may well have met you before. If I haven't, my name's Rachel. I've worked in, I guess I've worked in HR for about 20 odd years now, and started out in L&D. Ended up having a 16-year career in policing, which was utterly fascinating. Not a police officer, but police staff in a variety of L&D roles, and fell into diversity by accident, actually. I very sillily had my children at the same time as the crash in about 2007, 2008, and was looking for a role where I could work part-time and stay a certain level. And I saw this job on the board called Deputy Head of Diversity. Didn't really know what that meant, but thought surely they must be quite open to flexible working. And they were. And I ended up falling into this wonderful specialism that I've now been working in for a while. I've done that at Surrey Police. I've done it at the Met, which was a really exciting time there. And there's actually some brilliant practice there that often you don't necessarily get to hear about. And then I've spent also 4 years in a civil engineering infrastructure consultancy as well. So I've been on both sides, private sector, public sector. I've seen it all. And what's really interesting, Sally, when it comes to inclusion, and what we're going to talk about today is that wider employee experience piece as well. Many of the themes are exactly the same. We're talking about people at the end of the day and how they want to belong and perform to the best of their ability, and how we can support them doing that. So I think almost irrelevant of where you're working, there's different levels of maturity, and I've experienced both ends of that. but actually you can, like you say, you can really make impact quite quickly if you want to. But obviously that needs quite a lot of tenacity and a lot of support to make you do that as well. So happy to share some of those ideas today. And again, thanks for inviting me, Sally.
It's incredible. And I think it's really interesting point that you make there in terms of actually the challenges are the same. And I think I intimated that in kind of my opening, like no matter who you speak to, who they're working for, and under what guise, and sometimes under different titles, the challenges are the same that the businesses are facing right now. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation with you. We're also going to talk about change wave consultancy. I know that's going to come out later in the conversation, but yeah, really excited to hear about the waves that you're making in this space and the impact that you're having on your clients. Excuse the pun. So let's dive in. So when you look at the current kind of DEI landscape, what stands out most to you about how organizations are responding or repositioning? I think we're seeing that a lot in the market at the moment.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I think there's actually quite a big range in terms of that. I think if we believe everything we read, it's this big rollback, isn't it? Nobody's doing it anymore. It's, it's all over. It's all dead in the water and we're not doing it. And I do think, and having previously worked for a US-based organization, there's definite change there. You can't necessarily have the same types of conversations you would do previously. The narratives, the words around that have changed. And also, I think their appetite for real transformation has changed considerably as well. I wouldn't say it's stopping completely. I think, in many ways, the cork's out of the bottle now. And many of those ideas that our employees want, that our clients, customers expect as well, you can't just get rid of all those overnight. But we need to be realistic that if you are working, for example, for if you have a federal contract in the US, you need to be using different language, because at the end of the day, that's not going to stand you in good stead for winning work, depending on obviously what organization you're working for. That said, and actually, Sally, I think if we'd have been speaking 6 months ago, I think life was very bleak then. I think me and you met up at a few events and it was all a bit, a bit dour, and we're all a bit fed up. And we were seeing, like, for example, lots of impacts. The job market in terms of those types of roles really, I think, fell and is still it's starting to pick up again. I think there's green shoots, definitely. But I think what I am noticing now, particularly in the UK, and again, that looks different, but people are holding their nerve. I think the people who really want to do inclusion haven't really changed their position on that. They might have changed a little bit of language that they use. What I think is, and what I'm hoping does come out of this, because at the end of the day, Trump and Musk and people, sorry for using the T word, I know that upsets people, but, they haven't made all this happen. It's not a case of when they go away, then everything will be okay again. They were tapping into something that's building up for a while, which is the true fact that often we weren't bringing enough people with us in terms of whether it's the business case, whether it's the ethics, whether it's the heart and minds piece about inclusion. For whatever reason, it was still rather a small minority, the engaged few in that bubble who got it completely, but we weren't necessarily seeing the shift we needed. And I think if what comes out of this is, what I am noticing in terms of response is the clever organizations, those who are really leading from the front, and who are probably doing this for a while actually, have broadened out the conversation, still talking about ED&I when we need to, DEI, whichever language you want to use on that, but talking about wider employee experience and organizational culture, where everyone is included. Because I think for too long, the world of inclusion, I call it the inclusion illusion. I've noticed a lack of inclusion in the world of DEI sometimes. And if what comes out of this bit is actually we rebrand it, we pivot, whatever language you want to use, but to a piece where actually everyone feels they belong, and we're talking about every employee's experience and how that helps. I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think if you look at best practice examples, an organization like Onvero now have changed. They used to be ENEI, and they've changed to Onvero now because they're accepting there's a broader piece here about wider inclusion. So that's been very much set from the best practice experts out there as well. And I think that's really the way to go. You know, at ChangeWave, we use a wider employee experience model, which also covers areas like well-being, psychological safety, etc. Because ED&I can't be an island on its own. So I think a long-winded answer there, Sally, to what I'm noticing is there's a range of experiences, but you know, DI is not dead at all, and it won't be. It's just it does need to rebrand and pivot.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the thing is, I think probably the challenge that we're seeing as an industry is that it feels very reactive. It feels like we're not in control of it, which I've actually challenged in the last couple of keynotes that I've done over the last couple of weeks. Well, the last 3 I've done have been all around kind of the language and the narrative and the control that we have as a profession of that narrative. But I think, you know, it's the fact that it's been laid out so publicly. You know, I worked in finance and accountancy recruitment for 20 years before I went in the D&I space. And if I think about objectively how that industry evolved over that time, how you say in terms of the green shoots of new roles, new language, new business problems that as a profession was solving, it's no different to the world of DEI. Okay, it's just that we feel like we're under scrutiny and we feel like we're doing it under a magnifying glass, and everyone's looking at what we're doing because they've told us what we're doing is wrong. That feels more clunky and that feels more uncomfortable. But I agree with you, there's a real opportunity here for us as a profession to really take control of this narrative and to still do the work and have the impact, which is essentially why we're here. We're not here to tell everyone we're right, we're here to have an impact. So yeah, I completely agree with that. So thanks for sharing that. I really, appreciate your insights. So if we think about, you know, if we look at it from through a risk lens, okay, what risks do you see when organizations are changing that label without really defining what inclusion actually means for them? Because I think we're all on this journey, aren't we, in terms of redefining, rebranding, whatever. Where do you think the risks are from an organization? They change the label without redefining.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they drop completely, I think they are underestimating actually the power. And because I think what people often still forget is whether you get all this or not, legislatively, that's quite a difficult word to say.
It's a very hard one to say live.
Yeah, legally, you've still got to do this stuff. And particularly in the UK, that's getting even tighter. You know, when we look at the employment bill and the stuff coming our way in terms of that, you know, there's massive risks in terms of the legal compliance area. Now, I know we obviously want to build on that and go beyond that. But I think often the foundations people forget. People think it's about, you know, this wider kind of ideology. No, if you're an employer, you need to protect your staff and make sure you're not either discriminating, etc., etc. So I think that's really important that we remember that. I think the risks are if you do not think through. I mean, this is such a good opportunity to look back and think, what does inclusion really mean to our organisation? If I had to sum it up about what it means to our people, if I had to sum it up about what it means to our clients, customers, etc., what's our view on that? Because I think too often, and again, in the past, there was this rush to get involved in it without necessarily really understanding what it meant, often reacting very quickly, like you say, to societal events and making sure that we weren't left behind in terms of that. But we didn't really understand what ED&I meant. I think a lot of organisations thought it meant that we had a few pride marches, we stood up some ERGs, and that kind of almost ticked the box in terms of what inclusion means. What I don't think they really realised was if you really lift up that stone and see what's up in there in terms of, for example, real systemic challenges, you know, if you start to work with your people and ask them questions about what's it like to work here, you need to be ready for their response. And I don't think many organisations at the time really understood just what a difficult challenge it is to bring about an equitable workforce. So I think if you're just going to rebadge it with a different word, but basically just deliver everything you have before, which is probably, dare I say it, sometimes initiative-led rather than inclusion-led. So again, more tick box where you're delivering some initiatives, but not really challenging your culture and bringing out a more effective cultural piece, then it will just wither on the vine, won't it? And we'll be back going round in circles again, because then ED&I isn't making the impact it should do, etc., etc. So I think the risk is we don't use this opportunity. We won't always get this opportunity to really stop and think about what we want to achieve here. If organisations do that and do it well, then it's a real opportunity for everybody, because if you have an inclusive workplace, everyone benefits from that.
Absolutely. There's a couple of things that I wanted to kind of touch on there in terms of what you said. I think you articulated it so well in terms of it is very cyclical, isn't it? We've come to the end of a cycle, and it's really important for us to define that. What I thought might be really interesting as well is where you've had that experience, when you talk about kind of lifting that stone and seeing kind of inequitable systems, right, that can be wrapped up in practices, kind of behaviors, etc. But when you're lifting that stone and seeing the systems, the experience that I've had personally as an EDI lead, okay, sitting in a boardroom, and the experiences of many other DEI leads in terms of being gaslit in terms of their roles, to say, well, no, we haven't got that problem here. Well, the data is insinuating or demonstrating that we potentially have. But you're right, where that real kind of change bit comes in, people don't necessarily recognize that DEI, EDI inclusion is a change program. Okay. It's not a we're going to have a couple of ERGs and we're going to march in a pride march. But I also wonder whether there's an added level of kind of experience and complexity that comes with that when you're working in an institution like Met Police or within policing, and what the layers of kind of additional complexities are around these systems that we're trying to essentially break down to rebuild. So I don't know if you kind of shed any light on that, because I think that must have been fascinating.
It is completely fascinating. And I think part of this is when you are in this field, you can become absolutely overwhelmed in terms of the size of the issue. There's you never get to the bottom of your to-do list. There's so many issues to solve. And this is based on centuries of systemic injustice. And I'm good, Sally, but I'm not that good. I don't think I can completely turn that round myself. So part of it, I think, is as well, and interesting you brought up the Met there, that was an interesting piece, because my role, I wasn't responsible for the strategy. Right. I was responsible for, I guess, what you call HR programs and HR initiatives. And there's pros and cons to that as we've come on. So that was my role, to deliver those, and they were very successful to a certain point. So, for example, we introduced the Women Returners program. We completely rehauled and redesigned the way we manage workplace adjustments, because we were losing too many tribunals in terms of that. The challenge was, because I wasn't involved in the development of the structure and the strategy and the culture, they just withered on the vine a bit. Although actually the good thing is some of those programs are still going, which is great. But I guess what I'm saying is you can only make so much of an impact. And I think part of it is you need to be clear as a professional, what can I personally control here? What are my boundaries going to be? Where am I going to really put my energy into the most effort? Because the other piece is, you can't carry this whole responsibility yourself for the whole organisation. When I started at my last employer, I was absolutely clear that I'm not the only person here doing ED&I, and which was a shock. It took quite a while actually to get that point across, that don't just try and shove everything my way. And we've got an ED&I lead now; they can sort that piece out.
Yeah, that's exactly
it. Has to be a complete collective piece in terms of that, and because one person can't change the culture of a whole organisation.
No, but it is very heavy. It's very heavy, and the responsibility is felt, I think, because I'm yet to meet one person who's in the profession because they don't care about it.
Absolutely.
Which poses its own problems. But sorry, I'm going off piste. Apologies. So over to you.
So we've touched on it a little bit, and you get to see a whole range of organisations with your work that you do at Talent Included and the clients you're working with. What have you noticed about what distinguishes those that work really well and are doing well in this space, particularly at the moment, versus those that are still struggling with it? What have you noticed?
I think from a perspective of those who are struggling, and I think we've probably touched on a few of these things, is number one, they've fallen, they've lost their way. Okay, they have fallen victim to allowing the work that they do internally to be politicized, which I appreciate is really challenging in the current landscape. But a lot of the work that I've been doing with individuals in this space over the last couple of months is to approach the work and themselves. I mean, you were talking about boundaries a second ago, from a place of neutrality, as opposed to I'm here to fight and I'm here to combat. Okay. So I think that for me is like a kind of a bit of a top tip really, in terms of how do we, how do we neutralize the work and how we show up in the work. So it isn't so much a right or wrong, a yes or no, a good or bad. It's coming back far more from a kind of very much strategic, kind of neutral perspective. And also those who potentially are struggling a little bit don't have either this robust vision. So you spoke about, what does inclusion look like now, or a governance structure that then acts as an anchor. Okay. So if you haven't got those two things, I would encourage you to start there, because it also might indicate that the work that you've been doing could be perceived as surface level and not yet embedded into the systems and the talent life cycles, for example, that we need it to in order for this work to kind of have impact. But I wanted to kind of stress on this point that there shouldn't be any kind of shame or any feelings of failure that if you're not in that position yet, because we need to remember that, that the inclusion and equity and the byproducts of those are the business performance and the diversity within our workforce. And it's a journey that we're on. It's a change journey that we're on. And some organizations are starting at a much less mature point than others. So I think where we've seen those kind of fall short is a lot of comparison, a lot of that's working over here, we need to be doing it over there, but also enabling the work to be scrutinized externally. So we need to be able to really demonstrate what that ROI is, what that return on inclusion is within our space. And it has to be nuanced and it has to be relevant for our organizations. I think on the flip side, those who are doing it well can confidently articulate the why and the how. Okay. And that again changes and will continue to change. So how are we using it to enable business performance, and how can we confidently say that it's having an impact? And I also kind of want to, state here and really kind of make the point that, again, this is not a fixed state. Businesses have to be really, really agile to be able to, go into these uncharted waters and still come out as a success in terms of inclusion. And what success looks like as in inclusion is going to continually change. So I think that's what some organizations find quite challenging, is that actually, are we doing it right? Are we second guessing ourselves all the time? What does our end goal look like? And how do we know when we're approaching that the goal needs to be changed and moved? So yeah, I think for me, it's all around linking it to business resilience and really defining what inclusion looks like that's fixed as well within your organization, and being agile. I don't know what yours are.
Sally, what comes out of that is it's got to be so bespoke to your organization. This is, I think sometimes, especially when I remember the days when we'd be doing league tables and, equality index #1, and actually it's what that looks like and feels like for your organization, and how you bake it into your operational delivery, irrelevant of what that is, I think is really important. And it might mean that you have to go a bit slower and go back to basics a little bit, but that's fine, because once you've got that right, you can actually then propel forward to making great progress.
I think you do. I think you have to critically review it. I think it's very easy in this world to get caught up with, we have been nominated for this and we have got an award for this, and look what the impact that we're having on this with this initiative, because we're able to put it in our end of year annual report. Actually, what I think is good practice is critically reviewing and understanding where the gaps are and understanding where the data gaps are that you've got. So, think about it like your future self. What data am I going to need in the future to know whether this is a success or not? Or how am I even measuring success? And what do I need to be aware of? I mean, we do lots of kind of pest analysis stuff. And we do that as a profession as well. We kind of bring DEI leads together as a profession to say, to the point that you were making earlier, what's in my control and what's out of my control? How do I know that I'm being successful, or my practice is a success within the organization? And how can I critically review that continually to ensure that I'm kind of being agile in this space? I think it's really important to do, really, really important.
Absolutely.
So what should we talk about next? Some of the pain points, misconceptions? I don't know.
Yeah. I was just going to answer that because you pointed out a few bits there actually in terms of when you're working with these clients, that you would say right at the start that a lot of the themes are absolutely the same. What are your common misconceptions, pain points, themes that are coming out when you're speaking to these different organizations, and particularly those that are having trouble embedding it, and they might be strong on the initiatives piece, but they that wider piece about embedding cultural change. What have you noticed about that, Sally?
I think actually one of the things is people try to do too much. So what we were speaking about earlier in terms of actually, let's just go back to basics. It's interesting. I met with a HRD from a leading tech firm a couple of weeks ago, and she said, well, what should we do next? Should we look at social mobility? And I'm like, no, this isn't like a tick box that you need to like make sure that you're satisfying every protected characteristics that's out there. It's actually how you embed this in your systems, internally, and how can you make this language relevant for your internal audience, essentially. But I think one of the pain points or misconceptions or mistakes is not understanding the nuanced nature of this work. So I mentioned earlier, such and such has won an award for this, or company X down the road is doing this, we need to do it too, or why isn't it working here? Unless you are linking this work, which we see typically once you've got off that kind of first rung of the maturity scale, and then you're now like, okay, well, we're doing all of this stuff, now what? This is where I would invite organizations to really think about how they are embedding this into their business systems. And that could be their talent systems, their operation systems, their strategy. I can't say that word. I can't say it.
Think of another one, Sally.
Execution is what I'm trying to say. Why can't I say the word? Strategy execution. Now, if you think about those as business systems, okay, how are you embedding equity or inclusion in those business systems? And I think another one of the kind of the real misconceptions that I see, or the kind of lack of understanding, and again, this kind of comes with maturity, but it's almost like, I like to say to people, if you knew now what you knew then, what would you do differently? As we're taking people into kind of cycle 2 of like EDI 2.0, is understanding what the interdependencies are of those systems. So you've got to think of it like almost like a systems thinking approach. It's like you're not just trying to impact one thing, you're understanding from the offset what impact that then has on all the other kind of interdependencies in that system. Talent is a brilliant example of that. And so you start then unpicking, okay, well, if I make a change here, or if I embed this equity here, what impact is that going to have on everything else? And what can I do now to help embed that better? Maybe it be from a comms perspective, engagement perspective, embed that better as this project or this program or whatever it is that I'm creating kind of comes to life. So I think that for me is a real kind of misconception. It's like let's do this and this is great and this looks amazing from the kind of an optics perspective, but little thought is put into how you embed that into a system. So I don't know if you've got any kind of views on that.
Well, my bugbear, Sally, which I'll probably bring in. I was going to perhaps mention it later, but I'll bring it in now. My misconception is that lived experience makes a good ED&I practitioner. And I know that's controversial.
No, it's not.
But, all those things you started talking about there, they're about having a strategic mindset, being focusing on what it's like to be an internal consultant. How can you influence all those different parts of the jigsaw? How can you make sure you've got really robust governance? How do you make sure you're measuring your impact for you and your organization? How do you build effective relationships, etc., etc.? And I think what we need to do is make sure the people delivering this work have the skills, tools, and experience. Because if you're relying on your lived experience, which many practitioners have entered this arena because of that can only get you so far. And actually, it turns into burnout after a while. You can't just keep telling your story again and again and again, because there's an emotional impact there. And so therefore you need to, if you've got lived experience and the wonderful internal consultant package, then fantastic. You can really move up and down on that. But I think we need to have a think about how we support people who work in organizational culture in its widest piece. Because what's happening out there now is, we know there's been a lot of cuts in terms of the roles. In many organizations, a HRBP is being given the ED&I portfolio because they've got rid of perhaps the head or the after it. And that's why, for example, when we run our CREST program at Change Wave Consultancy, it's focusing on the skill set and practitioners, because there's not many places to go to learn how to be an effective ED&I practitioner. If you work in HR, you can go to places like the CIPD for operational pieces, but actually there's not that many providers out there who can support you. So we've developed a coaching program to allow people to, build their skill set, not just for their organizations, but for themselves as well, to be wider, more effective employee experience practitioners.
I really wanted to ask you about this because I think, number one, it's so well needed in the industry. I mean, I obviously represent lots of people from a career coaching perspective and from a recruitment perspective, which we'll talk about. But for you, I think that the positioning of your program is so well placed, because the people that I'm speaking to feel burnt out, Rachel. They feel like actually the skills that they need to do this job are multiplying. They haven't necessarily had that internal training or even sponsorship to be able to grow as individuals and to keep up with the demand. So I'm really interested to hear about, your program and what people can expect if they come onto it. What gaps are you filling essentially?
Yeah, so for me, the future of ED&I practitioners needs to be baked into this wider employee experience model. So we've got our own employee experience model, and we basically take you through all those pieces. So we would look at ED&I, because that's obviously very important, whether that's at a foundational level, because, arguably still there's some complicated areas there about the Equality Act, and you need to understand that, but also how to build those strategies as well, and make sure they really deliver systemic change. But also we'll cover things like well-being. We'll have modules on inclusive leadership, on EVP, because I think what people often forget about is the link between those ED&I and, for example, your talent attraction piece as well. Also your employee voice, employee engagement. That's the whole piece around organizational culture. So the beauty of it is it's a coaching program, so it's not just coming on and having an e-learning package. We also, it's bespoke to you, and you work out what's important to you as a practitioner, and where do you want to be, and what's your purpose, and what are your values, and how can you benefit the organization, and also how can you keep those boundaries you've just been talking about, so that you don't get burnt out, because I think that is a real challenge for many people in the profession at the moment.
I think it is. I think you're right. And I think it goes back to the point you were making earlier. This work's never done, right? This work is never done. Your to-do list will grow. And we have to remain agile in terms of, what is, happening from a societal perspective as well. So, I absolutely love that.
And often Sally, you're often the only person in your organisation, or at the best in a small team, and it feels a bit lonely. You don't know where to go for that support sometimes.
Yeah, I completely agree, which is why I think conversation like this is so important. So I feel like I've got so much to ask you. Tell me everything you know. Okay, I've got a really cool question for you. I think you're going to like this one. If you could redesign a DEI function for today's context, okay, what would you build in and what would you leave behind?
I know what I'd leave behind. Probably the events calendar. because I think it just gets in the way. I'm not saying there isn't a time, because it actually does bring people together and sometimes reaches groups you can't. But, you know, it can also mask the real issues. So just because you've got a very, you know, impactful International Women's Day, you're doing Pride, you're doing Black History Month, etc., etc., what are you really doing there to deliver change? And so that's the piece that I'm not so sure I don't know if I'll throw it out completely. That seems a bit excessive, but I'd certainly deprioritize it in terms of your wider strategy, because I just think you end up just in this circle of events, but where's the impact? And it's the same people coming to the events all the time, and they often carry the burden as well. Redesigning it, well, for me, I think I'd have to put it as part of that employee experience model. So it would be redesigned in a people strategy where ED&I isn't an island on its own. It would be part of a wider organisational culture piece with clear links to other areas, if not included in them completely, rather than being an add-on, because I think it's still often seen as an add-on, even by people in HR. Because it's still a relatively new profession, discipline for HR as well. I don't think it's very well understood there. And then we get into the conversation about should it sit in HR or not. I think there's pros and cons to that piece. I think it does depend on the maturity of your organisation. If you're first starting out, many of the simple things, I'm not saying simple because they're actually quite difficult, but your policy change, etc., a lot of that work sits in HR. So it actually can help, but it doesn't necessarily mean HR are on board with those changes, and also who then holds HR to account for delivery. I had a really interesting conversation, actually. I think Sally might be on, Sally Pritchett, who runs a comms agency called Something Big. And we had a brilliant conversation. What I'd not realised, and this is my lack of understanding, was the role comms plays in culture change. I think, to be honest, and any ex-comms leads I used to work with will have a wry smile now. I think I saw them as an enabler rather than part of the piece. And there is an argument, you know, a lot of the work that Sally does with her team there is delivering culture change in organisations. So I wonder also how we use the rest of the organisation to make sure we can deliver those key messages as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely love that. Yeah, thank you. And I think, yeah, really, really important. I'm just looking at some of the comments that have come up as well. So thank you. Hi, Joy. Hi, Sally. Yeah, well, I've got a question from Joy. Then I'll put up in a minute, Rachel. But yeah, fantastic. So where do we go from here then? Let's talk about the human layer. So what does this mean for us as kind of practitioners, as a profession? Yeah, I mean, what are your views on this?
Well, Sally, I'm interested in what you think about this. I've obviously said in terms of, I think there's something about raising the game of the professionals here. But, you know, you're really close to things like, for example, inclusive recruitment and things like that. What are you noticing in terms of, you know, the skills and the confidence in terms of that market as well? You're saying that you're trying to do a bit to change the narrative around it, because it is a bit doom and gloom at the moment, isn't it?
Well, I think the work that we're doing, especially within our kind of coaching practice, so just to kind of clarify, we are coaching those individuals who are in career transition or want to kind of level up in their current roles. Some also are actually kind of leaving corporate and going into consultancy. So we're kind of helping them to really empower them to take control of the narrative, okay? Because I think it's very easy to feel like in this space that you're not enough. You're not good enough, you're not having much, you know, impact, your role is under scrutiny. Someone's used this analogy to me before, it's almost like someone's like marking your homework, marking your work, but you're not allowed in the room. It feels really heavy at the moment. So a lot of the work that we're doing is really to step back into that place of power, right? Remembering who the F you are. I won't swear because I'm on LinkedIn, but, you know, that's where the invigoration and the motivation and the drive comes from. It doesn't come from this place of depletion. It doesn't come from this place of lack. It comes from, actually, this is the work I'm here to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. Do I think that the industry and the profession is changing? Yes. Do I think it needs to? Yes. But this is also an amazing opportunity for you to go, right, this is the skill I need to learn now. Or this is the direction I want my career to take from an inclusion perspective, right? This is what I want to call it. This is what I want the work to entail. And to the point that you made earlier, and Rachel, in terms of that kind of events piece, some people love that work. Some people love the awareness, the education, the L&D element of inclusion, right? So lean into that and go for it. Some are actually like, do you know what? I'm loving the data side of this. For me, it's all around creating, the vision and the business case based on data. And so actually that's the route that I want to go down. And I'll kind of bring you back to the story I spoke about earlier in terms of like the transformation that I saw finance and accountancy go in over the 20 years that I worked in that space. These new roles, shot out of nowhere and then became business critical. So I think the question I would be asking those in the profession and a lot of the work that we're doing on a one-to-one basis is, what impact do you want your role to have? And how are you best going to be able to support businesses? How do you attach that to a key business outcome, strategic outcome? And how can you then position yourself in the work to do it? And also what I've been inviting a lot of people to do in the space is, if they're in transition, to get really, really crystal clear on the role that they want to do. And when I say in transition, I mean that their roles have been made redundant or displaced. Okay. Let's really kind of articulate the value. However, there's a massive opportunity for those who are in role, who thinking this might not be the role for me, or the environment that I want to work in, or I feel like my role is under scrutiny, or it's not going to exist in 6 months' time. This is the opportunity to have a play, right?
Yeah,
and use this as a bloody game, which is what it is. Okay, careers and employment and all the rest of it, it's all a game. But use this as an opportunity to think, right, if I've got 6 months and I feel like my stakeholder management skills need to improve, my influencing skills need to improve, my project management skills need to improve, use it as an opportunity to practice, right? Practice. You've got nothing to lose. Only it's kind of personal growth. And this is what I really try to do a lot of my kind of empowerment work with, is you're in control of the skills you learn, how you show up, the language you use, how DEI is viewed in terms of your organization. You're in control of that. So actually use it as an opportunity to kind of springboard, or use it as a stepping stone to, this is actually what I want to be doing. You can tell I get really passionate about this stuff. But that's genuinely how I feel. Like, genuinely, I spoke about earlier, like I've been doing these LinkedIn lives for 6 years, right? When I first started doing them, the panic attacks I used to have coming on line and doing something like this, it almost kind of got to the point where I'm like, oh, don't do this anymore. This is like, it's not worth it. And then someone reached out and said, oh God, please keep having these conversations. This is exactly what we need. And I'm like, that's all you need, isn't it? But you've got to practice this stuff. Nothing comes naturally to any of us, right? They could see us sitting here talking, going, well, it's all right for them. Actually, it's not.
No. And on that note, Sally, I'm conscious of time, and I would like to bring in some of the excellent comments we've had on there, if that's all right, and then we'll perhaps
let me bring him over. Shall I go with Joy first?
Yes.
Here we go. Joy. Right. So this is a question for you, Rachel. Thank you, Joy, for joining. Okay. How do you respond to pushback when targeted interventions that are designed to level the playing field are misinterpreted as being unfair or anti a particular group? For example, the initiatives like 10,000 interns, fantastic initiative, have faced criticism that are called anti-racist to white people. How do you frame that conversation to focus on equity rather than exclusion? I love that.
Oh, Joy, I might need 2 days to answer that question. How can I put it quickly? That's tapped into exactly what we've been talking about before, about the world of inclusion has not been inclusive. Because what's coming, in my view, and from my experience, and this is just personal, generally the majority of people come into work to do a good job, and they probably do not think something like that is racist to white people. But what they do think is, they might be saying that, but I think what's behind that is, where's my development? What am I getting? Why is that group over there, whatever group that happens to be, why are they getting something and I'm not? And that's where we need to start build. That's why we don't do things in isolation. We look at the development plan for everybody in an organization to give everybody the support that they need as a minimum. That's the minimum. But then what we do is, where there are examples of clear injustice, and we know that through our data, we throw the data back and we say, look, and often what I'll just do is play out that data. I would imagine one of the reasons for doing it, and this is again why you need to be clear about why you're using that foundation. It should be because you've looked at your data and you're really underrepresented in that area, and you know that, and therefore this is a solution for that. So again, if you have I think there's two things for me. You use the data to illustrate the problem, not just because it's a badge to collect, but the really important piece is to get people feeling that they've got options too, and that they have opportunities to develop as well. So I think there's a balance for both.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for that, Joy. And then the lovely Michael. I often see bursts of activity after a crisis or review, but less focus on long-term integration. What have you seen work in terms of maintaining commitment to inclusion when that external pressure or scrutiny reduces?
The quick answer, Mike, given the time, is not much. I think that's the problem. I think it has just been continual react. And unfortunately, it's often because of some tragedy. And then all of a sudden we're back on board again, aren't we? And then we move on to the next shiny thing. This is where I think targets do help. You know, you need to look at how do you hold the narrative on these conversations? And what I found is that when we do have targets, which are realistic targets, and are things for us to explore, I've held the board's interest in developing these things more when there is a time when the targets aren't there. I've just experienced that in my previous organisation. We had targets. It was a focus every month, every quarter. It was reported on. As soon as the targets got dropped, then we didn't start talking about it in the same piece as well. So I know it's a divisive piece, but for certain groups in your organisation, performance measures helps you hold that narrative and that attention when basically the hearts and mind piece doesn't necessarily work anymore, or when it's just gone a little bit quieter in terms of that.
I think it's very easy to get distracted in this world. Going back to the point, I think that I'm probably echoing that, I made earlier. It's around like having that vision. What does it mean internally? What does easy DEI, inclusion, culture mean to us? And what's the governance behind it? Because regardless of then what's going on kind of, externally, if you think again about that pestle, this is what it means to us. And this is where we can demonstrate and pull ourselves kind of back to that anchor. Okay. I'm going to ask another couple of questions. I know it's had 45 minutes, but I've got a couple of more questions I want to ask you really quickly.
Keep your sandwiches, everyone.
Yeah, exactly. We just eat. I mean, we can't see you anyway, so just go for it. So number one question to you, Rachel, if you had to give 3 pieces of advice to a DEI leader looking to involve their impact right now, what would they be? Looking to evolve their impact.
Right. So first piece of advice, what is your impact? Do you even know what that is? And it might not be what your organization is telling you to do. Then you might have 2 different things. There's an intrinsic bit and an extrinsic bit there. What is your purpose? Why are you doing this? What is really important to you, and how will you leave your legacy? You need to start thinking about the answer to the question, because if you don't know those, your career in this will be quite short-lived, because you really need tenacity. Because for every wonderful day when you think you've hit the mark and you're making progress, there's another probably month where you feel like you're banging your head against the wall, because it's slow change, isn't it? So you need to work out, how will you measure your success and impact, and also accept that that might be different from what the organization is telling you to do. And then my second bit of advice would be, we've touched on it already, the bit about your skill set. How are you going to evolve as a practitioner so that you're thriving? Because I think you've touched on it. So we've been talking so much time about surviving. And I don't know about you, it's, when you work in this world, every year that goes by, you're expecting something that might happen to your role in a way that others perhaps just don't have that same heat on them. So how are you going to future-proof yourself? How are you going to make yourself so marketable that worst case scenario, that role did go? And because actually this is the first conversation I've I've been in for a while where we're 50 minutes in and we've not mentioned AI, because what does that look like in this world? Everyone's got to think about their future now and the impact. So how are you going to broaden out your skill set? How are you going to learn about the wider employee experience? And where are you going to get your support from? And demand that from your employer. I think often in this world, because there aren't many places to go to get specialist support and training, we don't ask for it then, because we think, oh, it'll be expensive, I won't be able to do it. Well, you know, an accountant wouldn't be able to practice their activities without sufficient training and support. So, you know, if it's important to the organization, then they need to invest in it as well. So I think that's really important. So, and then again, you know, developing. So I've said 3 there. The first thing would be, what is your impact? Why are you doing it? Secondly, evolve your skill set. And then, you know, just developing that whole bit about that mindset, about broadening it out, about you touched on it before, Sally. What are the opportunities I can grab here? Which I think is important to everybody at the moment, given the future of AI and the impact it could have.
Oh God, absolutely. I completely agree. Fantastic.
Sally, can I ask you one last one?
Yeah.
Just one, and then we'll promise we'll finish.
And then we really need to go. So please do.
What should employers be doing when they know there's a need there, but they don't know how to access what they need from a D&I lead?
I think we have seen our practice evolve significantly over the last 9 months, okay? And facilitated sessions are proving far more useful to kind of fact find, discuss, and essentially kind of effectively diagnose the problems. So I think let's do a deep dive. We'll deep dive on what the actual problem is, what the problem statement is, what it is that you're trying to solve, before we then go into this kind of solution mode. Everyone just gets really excited, don't they? And solutions, we could do this, we could do that, we could do that. There's no one size fits all. And I think, you know, companies really need to define where they are and where they want to go before they go all guns blazing into, like, we need to hire this head, and this head is going to do this job spec, which I've just taken off AI, you know, just taken off AI generated job spec of what a DEI lead does. It's so nuanced, and it depends on so many different things in terms of your maturity, your industry, your size, your appetite, you know, where your focus is in terms of your key stakeholder groups. So I think what I would recommend anyone doing before they even make that hire is take a step back and figure out exactly what they need from their inclusion lead and how they're going to set them up for success before they even think about hiring them, which I'm hoping is not going to stunt the employment market anymore in this space. We are definitely seeing more green shoots come out, which is good, but let's just take a step back before we go forward. Let's stop rushing into things. So that would be my parting comments, really. But thank you, everyone. So lovely to see you, Michael, Sally. I think someone called Christopher might have come on. Joy, anyone else who's lurking. If you want to know more about Rachel's incredible Crest program, please reach out to her. She's insanely good at what she does, and I just feel really honoured to have you on to launch Inclusion Rewritten. So thank you so much, and no doubt we'll catch up for a glass of wine soon.
Oh yes, of course.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.